Now, my dear listeners, we return to Kronos, king of the cosmos, and already haunted by the same pattern that ended his father. The prophecy still circles him like a shadow. One day, a child of his will rise. And so when Rhea came to him with the news of new life, Kronos didn't hear a blessing, he heard a threat. When Rhea finally told him she was carrying their first child, Kronos felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Her face glowed with such pure joy that it nearly broke his heart. She spoke of names and nurseries, of all the wonders they would show their little one. But all Kronos could hear was the echo of his father's curse. One of your own children will overthrow you just as you overthrew your father. The months of Rhea's pregnancy were the longest of Kronos's immortal existence. He watched her body change, watched her prepare with such tender care for their child's arrival. She would sing to the unborn baby, her voice like honey and starlight. She would place his hand on her growing belly so he could feel the little movements within. Each gesture of maternal love was like a knife twisting in his soul, because he knew what he had already decided to do. When the birthing day arrived, Kronos tried to convince himself that perhaps the prophecy was wrong. Perhaps this child would be different. Perhaps love would be stronger than destiny. But as he held his newborn daughter for the first time, looking into those innocent eyes that held such potential, such power, the fear overwhelmed everything else. Without warning, without explanation, Kronos opened his mouth wide and swallowed the child whole. The silence that followed was more terrible than any scream. Rhea stood frozen, her arms still extended where her baby had been just moments before. The look on her face was beyond heartbreak, beyond understanding. It was the look of someone whose entire world had just shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. But Kronos, driven by terror and prophecy, could not stop. When their second child was born, a son this time, the same horrible scene played out, and then a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. Each time, Rhea's cries of anguish grew more desperate. Each time, Kronos felt another piece of his soul die. But still, he could not risk his own destruction. After each terrible act, he would try to explain, try to make her understand. He would speak of the prophecy, of the necessity, of the greater good. But how do you explain the inexplicable? How do you justify the unjustifiable? Rhea listened with eyes that grew harder and more distant with each word, until she looked at him not with love, but with the cold calculation of someone planning war. For Rhea was not the broken, passive victim Kronos had perhaps expected her to become. She was a titan in her own right, with power and intelligence to match any of her kin. And now, with 5 children lost to her husband's madness, that power was turning toward a singular purpose, ensuring that her next child would survive. The 6th pregnancy was different. This time, Rhea told no one of her plans. She made no preparations in their shared palace. Instead, she waited and watched and planned with the patience of mountains and the fury of earthquakes. When her time drew near, she quietly slipped away to the island of Crete, to a hidden cave where ancient magic still hummed in the stone walls. There, attended by nymphs and protected by warrior spirits called the Kurets, Rhea gave birth to her youngest son. They named him Zeus, and from his first cry, there was something different about him. Lightning flickered in his baby eyes, and thunder rumbled gently in his infant laughter. This child would not be swallowed. This child would survive. While the newborn Zeus was whisked away to safety, hidden in the deepest part of the sacred cave, Rhea prepared for the most important performance of her life. She took a stone, roughly the size and weight of a baby, and wrapped it in soft swaddling clothes. To any casual observer, it looked exactly like a sleeping infant. When she returned to Kronos, the false child in her arms, her heart hammered with fear and desperate hope. Everything depended on this moment. If her husband sensed the deception, if he looked too closely or held the bundle too long, all would be lost. But Kronos, driven mad by his own fears and perhaps wanting to get the horrible deed over with as quickly as possible, barely glanced at the wrapped stone. He simply opened his mouth and swallowed it whole, just as he had done with all the others. For once, his paranoia worked against him. So certain was he that this was just another child to be consumed, he never questioned what he was actually swallowing. And so it was that Zeus, the future king of the gods, began his life in hiding. The nymphs fed him on honey and goat's milk, while the Curetes danced and clashed their shields whenever he cried, drowning out any sound that might betray his location to his father. In that sacred cave, protected by ancient magic and his mother's desperate love, the child grew strong. Meanwhile, Kronos ruled on, believing himself safe from the prophecy at last. But somewhere in his divine stomach, the stone Rhea had given him sat heavy and strange, though he could not quite understand why. And far away in Crete, a small boy with lightning in his eyes learned to walk and speak and dream of the day he would confront the father who had tried to devour him. The wheel of fate, it seemed, was still turning. The prophecy was not dead, merely delayed. And when the time was right, when Zeus had grown into his power and his purpose, the final confrontation would come. The son would face the father just as Kronos had once faced Uranus, and the cycle would begin anew.